So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session of the Patient Engagement Forum 2020 into reality. Today is the third day of the Patient Engagement Forum. We already had two sessions on June 25 and June 26. Today we're going to address three topics: patient engagement and its sustainability, the legal agreements explained between pharma companies or stakeholders and patients groups and patient representatives, but also patient engagement in Central and Eastern Europe. I will just do the introduction, and then the three topics will be addressed by my co-presenters afterwards. So what's the Patient Engagement Open Forum? Because some of you may not have attended the two previous days. So it's a series of virtual events in 2020, where we will all work together in a multi-stakeholder environment context to turn patient engagement into reality. That's really the message of this Patient Engagement Open Forum this year, is to turn patient engagement into reality. And we want to provide a holistic perspective around patient engagement, the landscape, the actors, but also to foster the collaboration and the co-creations to really defragment this environment. The Patient Engagement Open Forum is co-organized by Paradigm, a public-private partnership that I will explain a bit later very briefly, but also by two great initiatives that we partner with: Patient-Focused Medicine Development, that is also organizing sessions during the Open Forum, and UPATI, the Patient Academy, this training program. So let's keep going on the slide. So the agenda of the Open Forum is very diverse. We started on June 25 and we end in November 23rd. We were going to break for 2 months after today, and we will resume on September 10th. We already covered several topics you can see on the left-hand side of this slide. Today, we are also competing with two other sessions: that patient engagement, the tools, how to make patient engagement easier for everybody. And also with another topic, motherhood should not be a fight, better safety information on medicines used during pregnancy and breastfeeding with patients, for patients. And that's a workshop which is organized by IMI Conception, which is another public-private partnership. Again, those presentations will be available on the website for everyone to have access to that. On September 10th, we will present a toolbox where all the tools developed by Paradigm will be stored and accessible, but also we're going to present a great tool very much needed in this ecosystem, which is the patient engagement monitoring and evaluation framework. So that's going to be on September 10th, also very interesting sessions. Voila, I think it's let's work together to spread the word. If you want to use our hashtag or our handles on Twitter, please feel free to do that. It will be also very much welcome. The agenda for today, very easy: 3 topics: sustainability roadmap, legal agreement explained, and patient engagement in the CEE regions. And they're all topics that spur from the Paradigm Consortium. Paradigm is to make patient engagement easier for all. That's the ultimate goal in a sustainable manner. Our mission is to participate to the co-creation of a sustainable framework that allows systematic, meaningful, and also sustainable and ethical patient engagement in medicine, research and development. We focus on 3 decision points in the life cycle of, in the development of medicines: research and priority settings, design of clinical trial, and early dialogue with regulators and HTM. Our objectives are to develop processes and tools for those 3 points, but also to develop a sustainability roadmap for patient engagement, and we're going to hear about that topic later. Our members, this is not to showcase all, but it's 34 partners, patient groups, big pharma, smaller one, academics, and we have the support from the EMA. A workflow towards specific outputs, obviously. The whole idea was to understand the needs from the community, people engaged in patient engagement, and to develop tools to make patient engagement easier, to develop metrics for monitoring and evaluation, and everything should be underlined by a sustainable ecosystem. And that's why we really want to focus on. And this is how I give the floor to the colleagues, Elisa and Concha from Eurordis, Rare Disease Europe, where they can present the work around the sustainability roadmap.
Mathieu, you should allow me to screen share. Sorry.
Oh yeah, indeed, that's a new.
Yep, the new feature of Zoom.
A new feature. And I don't remember how to do it, to be honest.
Let me think. I think if you go to participants and the 3 dots next to my name, and then
okay, now it's
done.
done.
The host, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, let's try. Please let me know if you see my full screen, the full presentation mode. Yes? Okay.
It works great.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mathieu, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to the first flash session, the one on the sustainability roadmap. Okay, now. And this afternoon, myself, my name is Elisa Ferrer, Patient Engagement Manager at Eurordis, and together with my colleague, Concha Mayo, we are going to take you through the work that has been done as part of the Paradigm Sustainability work stream. Here on the right, we wanted to acknowledge and thank you the components, the partners participating in the roadmap core group, but of course the group and the inputs are wider, and we have also the contributions from the whole Paradigm Consortium and the Paradigm International Liaison group of experts and initiatives in the field of patient engagement. And before, now you know us, and before starting, we would like to know who is in the room. And I'm gonna hand over to Mathieu for a quick poll. And let us know what is your stakeholder group. So I'm going to stop sharing so that Mathieu can launch the poll. Okay, so let's try. You should go to menti.com and use the code that is on the screen, 489073. And just vote. And I believe you have used this system or similar systems in the past. Okay. We have some votes coming in. Okay. So don't be shy. There's 55 of us. So yeah, just please join and let us know. Okay. Okay. Some more. Good. We see that there's more or less half of the room comes from the patient community, the other half medicines developers, with yeah, slight more people from patient groups, and yeah, some people from academia, others as well. So
Elisa,
okay.
Elisa,
Yeah.
can I have one suggestion?
Yes.
Could we ask the people who wrote others to write from which stakeholder group they are in the chat, please? That would be very useful afterwards.
Thank you. Okay, but we don't see anyone from regulators, HTA bodies, payers, policymakers, or public research funders. Okay, we have some answers in the chat as well. So maybe there are people that are having problems logging into Menti, I don't know. But at some point we could close if there are no other. Okay, it seems that we are at 30 with with almost, like I said, slight predominance of the patient community, medicines developers, academia, and others that have also written their affiliations in the chat. So, well, thank you very much. I will go back to share my screen. Okay, full screen again, huh? Right? Okay. So, well, we see that we're missing a few stakeholders, but there's a big group here. So, Concha, I will pass it over to you, okay, so that you can continue.
Thank you, Elisa. I believe most of the people present and the ones who are not present are also doing patient engagement activities already. However, if we want patient engagement to be effective, meaningful, and sustainable, we all need to play a role in a coordinated way. The same as the participants of this amazing human tower that you see here, defying gravity. This is a collective work in which everyone matters. All members involved are equally important here, from big strong men supporting the base of the tower to the little girl raising her hand at the very top. Whether they are at the base, the middle, or the top, it doesn't matter. They are all equally important because they have a role, they all have a role. And if someone is not doing their part, the tower falls. Here's our community, the patient engagement community, formed by the patients and patients organizations. We saw a lot of them present here, and by other stakeholders such as medicines developers. We had a huge number of them as well, academia, regulatory authorities, HTA bodies, payers, policymakers, and public research funders. The work we are presenting today aims to provide a framework with a clear direction and tools so we can all play together in a coordinated manner to achieve our common vision. And this is our vision, a future state in which patient engagement is present in all stages of medicine development, and it is done in a meaningful and sustainable way. But where are we coming from and how are we going to get there? So I hand it over to you, Elisa.
Thank you, Concha. As mentioned earlier, one of the work streams of Paradigm was dedicating to the sustainability strategy of patient engagement, addressing the needs of all stakeholders. This work has three objectives: to ensure the long-term use of the resources for patient engagement co-created by Paradigm, to develop a sustainability roadmap to support optimal patient engagement in key decision-making points across medicines research and development, with the goal to achieve system-wide sustained patient engagement through changes in the culture, processes and resources across stakeholder groups and organizations. But how did we get here? This timeline shows all the key tasks that we have been working on for the past 2.5 years to develop the sustainability strategy for the patient engagement ecosystem. We started by conducting a survey to assess the needs and preferences of all stakeholders for patient engagement and asking them questions about sustainability as well. We also perform a benchmarking exercise of existing sustainability models in similar ecosystems, but also in fields other than patient engagement. With all this information, we developed scenarios for sustainable patient engagement. Another task is dedicated to the sustainability of key paradigm assets. And finally, we are in the final stages of developing the roadmap. So the final goal of patient engagement in medicines development is to have better medicines that lead to better health outcomes. And although patient engagement is happening so far, it's not yet a common practice for all stakeholders. So if we want to achieve this final goal, the engagement should happen in a systematic manner and following a structured approach. At the beginning of the project, when we were discussing sustainability, we agreed that an effective strategy to make patient engagement sustainable needs to drive the necessary culture changes, design processes that bring all stakeholders together, and ensure enough resources are mobilized. These three core elements have guided our discussions and our work towards describing a sustainability strategy addressing the needs of all stakeholders. So, as mentioned, the survey gave us some insights on the needs of stakeholders, but we wanted also to understand the factors that make an initiative sustainable. Therefore, we look into sustainability models from initiatives in the open innovation fields and in sectors outside patient engagement, such as the environment or education. What we learned could be connected to the three sustainability dimensions. On the culture, we learned that sustainability was associated with transparency on how decisions are taken and how things are done, and also with building trust, with being open and communicate about successes and failures, and to have a shared purpose among all stakeholders. The processes need to be flexible and agile, and we need to build on existing resources, looking for complementarity and not reinventing the wheel. Clear rules also help, and also to have metrics to show and demonstrate value. On the resources, we identified that having a supportive legal framework, having financial independence, and having a compensation framework for participants also were very important. Together, the learnings from the survey and the benchmarking analysis, and also further insights from the partners collected during multiple discussions and workshops, gave us the foundations to build future sustainability scenarios for patient engagement. While building these scenarios, we tried to answer these three questions following our framework. What will drive the practice of patient engagement and make it systematic? What will reinforce the uptake of best practices? And how to finance patient engagement, maintain trust, and keep independence? And we came up with 4 elements in these future scenarios. The top-down signal, in which patient engagement practices are driven by a strong signal coming from the authorities, regulatory authorities, HTA bodies, that require evidence of patient engagement for their decision making. And in this element, best practices are supported by harmonized guidelines and methodologies. A second element in which the practices are reinforced by a collective effort from all stakeholders who develop new methods and learn from each other's experience. In this element, metrics are critical to identify and reinforce the most efficient practices. These 2 elements on the top address the first 2 questions. While the two on at the bottom, the one-stop shop approach and the patient engagement market approach, address how patient engagement is financed and delivered. So the one-stop shop approach involved a neutral hub coordinating and organizing patient activities, and the market approach reflected the current situation in which patient engagement can be delivered by multiple organizations, some of them non-profit and others for profit. So we issued these scenarios for consultation to the consortium and the PEOF, and we saw the following preference, a preference for a combined scenario, for a scenario which combined these two elements, the top-down signal and the patient engagement market approach. So we had a lot of information collected to start building the roadmap, but we went a bit further and consulted with our patient and industry partners in targeted consultations. We also conducted informal interviews with regulators like the EMA or the MHRA, and supranational bodies like the ICH and the International Coalition of Medicine Regulatory Agencies. We wanted to test the feasibility of this top-down approach that we saw before. Finally, as we want the roadmap to be widely adopted, we also considered the perspectives from Central and Eastern Europe countries that we could gather during the patient engagement CE workshop, and that you will learn more about it in the last presentation of this afternoon. We, the core group, work on the roadmap, shape it, and then launch it for consultation with the rest of the partners and the PEOF. And we are now at the final stages, and this will be the subject of our presentation today. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Concha.
Thank you, Elisa. This is the roadmap we designed to help us get in from our current state to our future desired vision. Although in recent years, there has been an increase of patient engagement opportunities and multi-stakeholder collaborations, the current landscape still presents barriers to patient engagement. These barriers could be financial, could be related to a lack of resources in organizations, lack of knowledge and experience to carry out patient engagement, cultural barriers such as the stigma associated to certain conditions, language barriers, and also political barriers. For example, if there's no political support to patients' organizations, patients' perspectives won't be included into the decision-making processes and policies. Since these barriers have a negative impact on the sustainability of patient engagement, we have taken them into account when proposing actions and tools to overcome them. Today, we would like to present a snapshot of the roadmap and its structure and some content highlights, as it would be too long to explain it in full detail. The sustainability roadmap is a visual representation of the steps we need to take in order to achieve our vision. We have identified 4 high-level strategic objectives that we called end goals, and that are represented here by different lanes of a common road, all leading into the same direction. They might move at different paces, but all of them lead towards achieving the set vision. These end goals are: establish an ethical, trust-based collaboration among all patient engagement stakeholders involved in medicine research and development, secure, inclusive, and diverse patient engagement, embed patient engagement in the mindset at every step and across organizations, and ensure dedicated leadership and operational time, resources, and funding for patient engagement. Each one of them, it's broken down into intermediate goals.
Wait a second, I think.
We just have somebody who is sharing his screen or her screen by mistake.
Okay. Okay, I will go back. Is that okay? It's where we are?
Yeah, it's working now.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. I just told you the 4 end goals we have identified. And as you can see here, all of them are broken down into intermediate goals, which are the middle steps we have identified that can lead us to achieve each one of them. Now we are going to zoom into the roadmap architecture, taking the first goal as an example. That goal is establish an ethical, trust-based collaboration among all stakeholders involved in medicine's research and development. As you can see, we define 3 different intermediate goals: include patients as true partners, identify the right incentives for patient engagement for all stakeholders, and improve the societal perception of the collaboration between patients, their organizations, and relevant stakeholders. For each intermediate goal, we have identified some specific actions that may apply to one or more than one type of stakeholder. For example, if we take the first intermediate goal, include patients as true partners, we identify 2 different themes. One theme that applies to the patient community only, with specific actions designed to have a coordinated voice for patient engagement. And a second theme with actions designed to include the patient's voice in the structure of relevant decision-making bodies and stakeholders' organization. At each step of this roadmap, there is an invitation to the involved stakeholders to make use of certain tools and resources to carry out the actions. For the sake of time, we do not show the detailed list of actions for the other 2 intermediate goals, but the same structure and detail can be found in the roadmap document. Over to you, Elisa.
Thank you. Let's look at the tools for a moment. The roadmap relies on a series of tools and resources that will help to carry out the actions. The tools can fall into 3 broad categories. Here on the left, we have the tools to facilitate the planning and implementation of patient engagement activities. And here we can, what we call patient engagement integrated resources. So here we find the Paradigm Toolbox, with a list of tools that you may be a bit familiar with, as they have been issued for public consultation. And also we have other resources from different initiatives like PFMD or UPATI, and other global initiatives like Transcelerate, CTTI, the National Health Council, or PECORI, just to name a few. Here we couldn't be exhaustive, so more detail is provided in the document. Then the other group is the one on training and education resources for both the patient community and for professionals, also provided by a number of initiatives and organizations. And a third group that we call here multi-stakeholder platforms, and that are either public-private consortia, networks, or other types of networking, multi-stakeholder networking platforms, like it could be the Patient Engagement Open Forum, for instance. The roadmap aims to ensure the long-term use of the resources created by Paradigm, but putting them into context with existing frameworks, like, for example, PFMD and UPATI. But all of these will be used in a complementary manner. Now we're gonna describe briefly the remaining sections of this roadmap. The second goal is to secure inclusive and diverse patient engagement. And under this, we have described 2 intermediate goals. The first one is to meaningfully involve patients and the representatives in patient engagement activities. And here we have included actions around the use of tools and training solutions to facilitate the involvement and increase capability. Also, to follow recommendations to achieve diversity or involve vulnerable populations and other underrepresented groups. And also to actions around the monitoring of attitudes to the value of patient engagement. And for these, to carry out these actions, during the roadmap, we highlight the relevant tools. For example, patient engagement integrated resources will be the ones needed to facilitate the involvement and also increase capability through training and education. And then the monitoring and evaluation framework will be useful also to monitor this changing attitudes to the value of patient engagement. All these coordinated actions are aimed to achieve the goal. The second intermediate goal involves a bottom-up approach, calling to local, regional, and national bodies from all stakeholder groups to act as drivers for change and to align on best practices for patient engagement. This goal also requires the promotion of alliances between stakeholders, networks, projects, and initiatives at a local, national, and international level to avoid fragmentation and duplication. Here, the tools proposed are to make use of these multi-stakeholder networking practices, platforms, to disseminate and share and adopt good practices for patient engagement, and also to use other networks like regulatory HTA or payer networks. The third end goal is to embed patient engagement in the mindset at every step and across organizations. This is a very broad end goal. And it has 3 intermediate goals covering the following topics. Recognize patient engagement as valuable and visible to all stakeholders. Embed patient engagement across the medicine's life cycle, integrated into processes and across functions. And have a common framework for patient engagement. Here we showed just a few actions. This is just an example because I said the section is really broad. Here we could use metrics to demonstrate the impact and value of patient engagement activities. Actions to grow a community convinced about the value of patient engagement. Actions for organizations to become truly patient-centric, following structured and systematic processes. And also actions related to promoting guidelines that define what type of patient engagement data can be submitted as evidence and how to use it. Here, institutions like ICH or SIOMS and regulatory authorities and HTA bodies may have a role in creating this need for more systematic engagement by supporting the inclusion of this type of data in their decision making and also providing guidance on how to use it. And here are some of the tools that that could be useful to achieve this goal. Finally, the fourth end goal aims to ensure that the resources required to carry out meaningful patient engagement in a sustainable manner. For example, to assess the current capabilities of the organization and decide if more organizational capacity is needed, implement a compensation framework for patients according to fair market value standards and compliant with the regulations, and collect data demonstrating patient engagement value and success in various countries so that it can be promoted in areas where it is less well developed. For this, the tools recommended could be the following: assess the capabilities using the paradigm tool on the recommendations on the capabilities for patient engagement, resources on financial compensation, and the monitoring and evaluation framework. But the roadmap has some limitations, isn't that right, Concha?
Yes, it is. We acknowledge that this roadmap is aspirational. We cannot test it before stakeholders will implement it. Full implementation may not be feasible. And as mentioned at the beginning, everyone is responsible for its implementation, which may be a risk. And periodic benchmarking to measure progress is currently done separately by each stakeholder group using different mechanisms, which might be difficult to coordinate. We all agree that to make patient engagement sustainable will be a process of change that is expected to occur at a different pace across geographies and organizations. How this roadmap is disseminated will influence its adoption and further implementation. According to this theory we're seeing here, the theory of diffusion and of innovation, a critical mass is needed to successfully implement any kind of innovation. This theory has been adopted in the field of patient engagement already by PFMD on the adoption of patient-centric practices. If we consider our roadmap as an innovation, this is what we could expect to happen. We would have a group of innovators who are the initial leaders in promoting and implementing the roadmap. They are very few, and they are the ones ready to take on the initial risk and make significant changes to ensure patient engagement sustainability. Then we have the early adopters that would support the roadmap and would be ready to work at implementing it. And they would also be willing to promote it and encourage others. Later, we will have the early majority that would be interested in the roadmap, but would take time to get ready and to think whether they want to be on board or not. And they like the idea, but they are not engaged yet. Then we will have the late majority, still have some questions either about the patient engagement or about the roadmap, and they prefer to see how things go with the roadmap before getting too involved. The late majority will only come on board when the early majority is already there and have tested it. And finally, we have the laggards, which are not sure that such a significant change is needed. They might get on board on the longer term, but not likely in the near future. And we really feel curious to know what all the people present here today feel towards this roadmap. Do you feel like the innovator who is going to be the first one to adopt it, or are you more like the early majority who are interested but not ready to get on board yet? So I'm going to pass the word to Matthias so he can launch a brief poll for you to answer these questions. Thank you. You will have to go into www.menti.com and use the same code as before, 489073. You can also see the code here on the top of your screen. Great, we have already people voting. I'm so happy because the early adopters are starting to fill this circle, and we were kind of waiting for that to happen. Let's wait for a few more answers and see. We have no laggards. Have you realized, Elisa?
Yeah.
Well, this is great. We have 32 people. I think we have a nice, clear picture of what we have here. As I said, we thought that innovators and early adopters could be the majority in the room, although in real life, when you launch a new project, a new technological project, they are very few, but we are all here. So that means that we already have an interest, so we probably have a bias here. And
okay. I think we can stop it, no? Now?
Oh,
probably?
yes. Thank you, Mathieu.
Okay, we'll have like the final slides.
Yeah, so it's great that we have this majority here. Because, well, that's the end of our presentation, but it's not the end of the roadmap, and there is a lot to be done, so we need you. And you have seen our vision. We also have a plan, and equally important is that we need to make it happen. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Concha and Elisa. That was really clear, and indeed, no laggers and a lot of early adopters in this crowd, in these 64 people here joining today. So that's really good. And then we got really nice questions on the chat is, are we talking weeks, months until we see this? I would have had years. What would you see, Elisa? when patient engagement will become sustainable?
Well, it's a very good question, and I think we are heading to the right direction. Here we have seen, I could say since the beginning of the project, more and more engagement around this topic, and we hope that it's as soon as possible. Clearly, we have worked towards giving a strategic plan the right direction towards this goal. So let's hope that it's very soon. Also, I think that the person was also asking the roadmap when when it will come to light, but this will be very soon or sooner. And at the end of the project, we will submit the roadmap and comply with our duties. We're also planning to publish it, and we are planning on also a communication material to disseminate it. So we are talking of some months, but not so many.
Yeah, and just to add, indeed, the question was about the roadmap, but I think it's interesting to see what's the time frame to see patient engagement sustainable and supported by the sustainability roadmap and so on. And at the DIA, there was a really good session, the DIA Europe meeting last week or 2 weeks ago, where I asked the question, where do you see patient engagement being sustainable when? And the option I gave there was between 5, 10 or 20 years, and 50% were saying 5 years, 50% were saying 10 years. So the estimate for another meeting was 7.5 years. So that's not too bad. Okay. If I'm not wrong, we have a bit of time for Q&A, right? So if you have other questions, please put them on the chat so we can try to see if we can take a few questions from the audience. Unfortunately, we're trying not to make you able to unmute yourself. Otherwise, it's becoming a bit difficult. So please use the chat for any questions you may have. And if no one has a question, then we jump to the next topic. That would also be an option. Okay, nothing is coming. You are next for Legal Agreement Explain. You ready to take over?
I think we're ready.
All right, let's go. Thank you very much, Elisa and Concha. Great presentation on this roadmap.
Can you see my screen? Yes?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, all right. Welcome everyone from my side as well. We're here representing one of the tools that Elisa and Concha mentioned in a few slides back. So this is a project that had started long before this, and in Paradigm, we worked towards adding another layer to already existing tools. So you'll hear a little bit more about that. So very happy to see everyone here. Together with me today, I have Karen and Julia, who have been part of the task force representing their organizations. But we want to acknowledge also the big group that is our task force. It's part of the partners in Paradigm, where we focused on this. I'm gonna invite Julia and Karen to introduce themselves as well.
Hi, Chi, thank you. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. As she said, I'm Julia Tolley. I work as Operations Manager with Myeloma Patients Europe. I've been with MPE since early this year, so fairly new to the Legal Agreements project, but really happy to provide an overview and a bit of history for you today.
Thanks, Julia. Do we have Karen?
Yes, I'm sorry, there's a construction work going on in the building I'm in, so I'm keeping my mic off unless it's absolutely necessary, just to save your ears. My name is Karen Druckmann. I'm a board member of HHT Europe and the president of HHT Swiss, which is a patient organization for rare vascular disease in Switzerland. But my primary occupation is that I'm an attorney. And so she asked me if I would look over the agreements, both from a legal standpoint and from a patient advocate standpoint. So the purpose of this whole project is to try and simplify what people like me do so that people who don't know anything about the law can still function in this world. So I look forward to presenting just a little bit the tool that we've developed here.
Thanks, Karen. And for my part, my name is Chipa Karinam. I'm a program manager at the Synergist, and we're so happy to be part of the IMI paradigm to help shape all these tools and make systematic patient engagement really happen. So in this session, we want to introduce to you a little bit of the scope of the work, because this didn't just come out of the blue, a little bit of the background of the tremendous work that has been already done by We Can with the lead of MPE. We want to present the outcomes of this part of the work specifically, show you the prototype that we just got ready a couple of weeks ago. So it's brand new. It will be available. It's already available to you to click through. And then we want to ask you a couple of questions. It's not going to be a quiz, but we would like you to pay attention to the presentation as well. We want to know a little bit more about you. And then we're here, of course, to answer your questions. I think some of our task force members are participating in the session as well, even though they're not presenting. So they'll be helping us answer your questions. So please keep the chat box busy. With this, I want to hand it over to Julia to explain and present to you the work that happened before we started this task force and before we created this patient engagement agreements explained project. Julia.
Thank you, Chi. So yeah, I guess when she says this has been kind of here for a long time, she's very correct. So this all started back in 2016 when MPE, through speaking with members, other patient organizations, started to realize that there was something reported quite consistently. And that was around kind of the agreements that were required in collaboration with pharmaceutical companies. And the feedback was that patient organizations didn't feel confident signing legal agreements. There were time issues, that the sheer time that it takes to review these kind of things. And often it was volunteers who were kind of involved in these reviews. And there were complexity issues, as you can imagine. So, you know, these were big legal documents, and these were seen as very complex, you know, very difficult to understand for, you know, patient organizations and kind of lay people. And there was a feeling that maybe some patient organizations kind of blind signed these and then felt really uneasy about the risks that they may have been at. And sometimes unintentionally, these were real risks. So patient organizations were left feeling unprotected, particularly things that are like IP, intellectual property, or indemnity. So there was really a commitment to say, okay, something needs to be done here. So MPE in 2016 decided that this was really a project that would benefit from collaboration. So from the start of this project, the advantages of working collaboratively on this were really clear. So in fact, it was that this collaboration was really essential to success in the project. And that was not only in kind of achieving the aims and objectives, but ensuring that those aims and objectives really were resulted in something that was actually of use to stakeholders. I can see you flicking forward there, Chi. Sorry, I was still on the main slide. I was going to move into these ones, but thank you. Very responsive. So it was kind of decided right at the beginning that the project would sit within the domain of We Can, which is the work group of European Cancer Patient Advocacy Networks. On the slides here, it says it was 22. We're now at 24 umbrella organizations who really represent the European cancer community. And then within that domain, a task group was initiated that brought together representatives of patient organizations and of legal and compliance departments and pharmaceutical companies. And for the first time, these people sat at the same table and talked. And so around this same time, PFMD were also having the same realizations as MPE around the difficulties that were faced by patient organizations in understanding these legal agreements, and the difficulties that pharmaceutical companies were having in understanding the difficulties patient organizations were having in understanding legal agreements. So again, in that spirit of collaboration and recognizing the benefits that this could bring, everything was brought together. So PFMD and we can join together in the Reasonable Legal Agreements project that we're talking about today. So I think that gives an overview of the slides we've covered so far. So just to give an overview to everyone of who was involved, there was obviously a primary drafting group. So you'll see from WECAN's side, there was representation of 5 different member patient organizations there. From PFMD, you'll see Nicholas and Mark there. There were legal experts involved from Field Fisher and the University of Barcelona. And there were representatives in that drafting group of 3 pharmaceutical companies. And I think here there's something really important to stress about the multi-stakeholder alignment work group, which played a pivotal role in this. As you can see there, there were 14 companies involved in that work group. And I think what I mentioned earlier about, companies sitting down with patient organizations and talking to each other was really important. It was a huge opportunity for legal and compliance departments, legal experts and patient organizations to sit down and really understand the issues that were coming about, talk to each other in the same kind of language, no jargon, and say, this is why this is important to us, and we understand why it's important to you. So I guess I will hand over at this point to Karen.
So before Karen takes over, Karen, you might be muted. Taking that forward to last year, there was a workshop at the Patient Engagement Open Forum in September, where these guiding principles and reference agreements that were in drafting were presented, tested, and it was actually there that this additional need was identified and the collaboration with Paradigm started. And this additional need was specifically to help the patient community, but not only, maybe there are other in the public as well who are struggling with clauses and different agreements in their collaborations with pharma or researchers. And this is actually created to help them understand the agreements better, the clauses that they are reading, that they're entering to. So from there, Karen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we worked on, there are several parts to these tools. The first is the guiding principles, which attempt to explain what needs to be an agreement, why it needs to be an agreement, what the interactions have to be, and what some of the legal issues are. That's sort of the point of departure. And in addition, and sort of as a series of appendices to the guiding principles, there are 4 model contracts that are included. These are to serve as, well, can I have the next slide, please, G? There we go. Oh, here's the structure, and I guess we'll go, sorry, I thought the slides were in a different order. These are the 4 agreements. There's an agreement for an advisory board. There's an agreement to cover a situation where there is a consultancy with a specific stakeholder. Another to cover simply a speaking engagement. And then a 4th to cover a larger collaboration, a larger form of collaboration. Can we go back 1 slide, G?
Yes.
Thank you. So the guiding principles have various sections that talk about each of the major topics that are covered in all of the agreements: general principles of contract, issues of confidentiality, questions of intellectual property, things like that. And in each section, there are 3 parts. One is an explanation of why we need such things. Another would be then a series of examples. And then there's an explanation or the guiding principle that was used to draft these examples. Chi, can we switch to one of the agreements? I think you have the advisory board agreement open.
Yeah, just one second.
I thought I would just show you what one of these looks like so you can see how useful they can be or what purpose they can serve. I don't know what.
Are you seeing, sorry.
Now I'm seeing you.
Are you seeing it now?
There we go.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So these are model agreements. They're not agreements in and of themselves, but they're examples of what these types of agreements might look like. Hopefully all 4 of the agreements match in that the standard clauses are pretty much the same. And if there are various types of interactions between a stakeholder and pharma, you can take each one of these agreements and none of them will contradict each other. The idea is to look at one of these agreements, and the tool that we've developed, well, I just checked it. All of the work was Julia and her team. Can we scroll down a little bit to the next page? So you can see what it looks like. There's a general introduction here, an explanation of why the types of clauses are in here. And then as you look, can you scroll down even more? You actually get into the agreement itself. And then here's what an agreement would actually look like. There are explanations of things that may be particularly complicated with footnotes here so that someone who does not have a legal background can read these and know what they're about. These templates were all drafted by lawyers, so you should be aware that sometimes the language that's used may not seem simple to you, but understand that some of the stuff has to be in there for legal reasons. And the purpose of this tool is for those types of suggestions, for those types of situations. Here you have a version of the agreement that explains what it is. For example, the term subsidiary is something that is very useful to use if there's any organization involved. And you can see here in the footnote, there's an explanation of exactly what a subsidiary is. And as you go through these agreements, you'll see this is how all of them are made. In fact, Chi, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that some of them, there are also, there are links directly in the document.
Yeah,
in the form that doesn't have the explanations, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So if I could just have the next slide, just so you understand why this is important. Can we get, obviously it's important when you enter into negotiations for you to know what you're talking about. The next slide, that one. So it's important for us as patients, and now I'm putting on my patient hat rather than my lawyer hat. It's important for us to understand what the issues are and understand why it is that pharma companies want specific clauses in their contracts. So these tools are there to explain what those clauses are, what they do, why they need to be in there. So it helps give us knowledge and understanding of the contracting process. But it does more than that. And this is perhaps the part that's not immediately clear. First of all, if a patient organization can come into a negotiation already with close to finished contracts, it makes it clear that the patient organization has some idea of what they're expecting out of this relationship, how they're expecting it to work, what the details are, and it levels the playing field a little bit in the sense that it gives the patient organization or the other stakeholder the appearance of being on the same level, the appearance of professionalism in terms of contracting. And then the one part that most people usually aren't willing to admit, but there's also an enormous advantage to having what lawyers call the drafter's privilege. That is, the person who does the first draft of a contract is the one who sets the parameters of the negotiation. Even if the final contract doesn't look exactly like the one you come in with as a first draft, you've at least set forth the structure. It's a little bit like if you go into a market and you're negotiating, whoever's the first one to name a price, you've already defined the area within which you're going to negotiate. So this gives you a certain amount of negotiation strength in all of this. If I put my lawyer hat back on, I will still strongly recommend that any of you who use these agreements, if you have the possibility of having it checked by a lawyer before you sign it, it's still a good idea, just to make sure you haven't changed anything or there isn't something peculiar to your particular situation that should be in there. But hopefully most of that work has already been done for you. I think that's about all I wanted to say about this, but please feel free to ask questions. That's what we're here for.
Thanks, Karen. And so that takes us to the actual tool. So there are the templates that have been co-created with the lead of WeCan. There are 4 agreements with the guiding principles. The task force that we organized and put together here under Paradigm is to provide extra explanations to the difficult wording, the difficult clauses that there still were. And we went through a number of review rounds with our patient community that is within the network. There were those who have some experience with working with pharma, so have some experience in contracts and have seen some contracts. And there were also those who have not been involved and are seeing a typical or this reference contract for the first time. We asked them to highlight the parts that were difficult to understand, and based from that, we went into co-creating the explanations in lay term so that it is understandable when you go through it. So with that, I'd like to actually show you the product itself. So just give me 1 second here, and we can put the link in the chat as well, so you can test it out yourself. And if you can see my screen again, you should be seeing a website, imiparadigm.eu, PE Toolbox, and Contract Templates. This will be where the tool will be hosted. It is just a website, but hopefully this website will help you navigate further and help you in your contractual situations. So on this website, we wanted to provide to you the actual reference agreements, all of those templates that have been provided, but also provide to you the explained versions. So in the beginning, you'll find lots of information about the work itself, the background, how to, even the glossary that all the terms that we explained in the different contracts, you can find everything here in one place. And also methodology and the task force participants who we had in the team to help deliver this. So if we go into one of those agreements here, the consultancy agreement, for example, it will open up to you as you would see the agreement. So before that, you see the about and a pop-up on where a highlight has been done by our patient community that the terminology needs to be explained. We did that explanation and provide that to you as a hover over. So what we looked at just before when Karen explained that we worked from the document itself, you can see the boxes and then the terminology highlighted with the footnotes underneath. The same thing has been turned into a website here where you can scroll through or click from the left to the specific area or clause that you want to find out. So for example, in the services, you can open it up and check that out, or you can go all the way to data protection, for example, if that's the one that you don't understand and want more explanations for. In here, we tried to, of course, take into consideration as much as possible accessibility considerations. So you are able to increase, decrease font size. Actually, now that I'm looking at it now, I feel like we need to maybe highlight the, use a different color for maybe visually impaired. All the text here are text versions, so that if you are using a screen reader, the screen reader will be able to read this content, so it's not a PDF. You can also, of course, download a PDF version on your screen or download in a Word version from the explained contract or from the proper, the weekend template as well. So the aim of this toolbox is really to help you in understanding those contracts and navigating through the legal environments, and also maybe shape and help you draft your own contracts as well. This work is in public consultation. So if you go to the IMI Paradigm website, there is a public consultation link, but you can join it in here as well. We want you to test it out because, like I said in the beginning, we just got this ready a couple of weeks ago. So it is in testing. It is a very first prototype. So we want to know, how would you use it? How can we make it even more useful for you? And when you go through the tool itself, or you go through the templates, also let us know. There's a section for the online tool. There's another section for the content of the templates, the explanations as well. How can we make it even more useful for you? And with that, I think we can go to our questions for you. So we have compiled, I think, 5 questions for you. I think we can skip the first question, because the first question is about which stakeholder group are you. So I think we already identified that with Elisa and Concha. So we have 5 more. You can use the same menti.com link with the same code 489073. Let us know, would you use these templates? Or templates like this? Would you find use for it? And Matthew, let me know, can people still vote if we move forward from this screen, so that
Not really.
No? Okay, so we'll take
really.
one by one. Okay, all right.
But I tested the no yesterday and everything works. It's not that the no doesn't work.
Okay. Cool. Thanks for that. And please keep sending questions in using the chat box. We'll take them in just a minute. This is great.
It's always nice to know that what you've been working on for years is actually useful to someone.
I'm going to prepare everyone for the next question already. The next one you will see is, would these lay term explanations help you understand and explain the legal jargon? Now, it's a little bit, oh, we jumped.
Sorry, something happened.
Okay, here.
That's the one you want, yes.
Yes, yes. So this is actually, you might have to explain, answer this without seeing the contracts more. I just realized that now. But at least it will give us a little bit of indication if the explanation of some of the legal jargon would actually help people. And then while you're answering this question, the next one that is coming is, what is the likelihood that you would use this digital tool? We have one in. So in your own time, once you have answered the previous questions.
If I can interrupt for just 1 second, I've been flipping through the chats And one piece of information that might be useful to some of you is you will see in some of the agreements, some of the clauses have highlighted yellow that says for Europe only. Know that the reason why those specific sections are in there is because of the European regulation on data privacy. Those specific clauses refer to that piece of legislation. So if you're outside Europe, you don't need those clauses, but that doesn't mean that the agreements themselves aren't for use outside of Europe. The agreements should be useful for just about any jurisdiction.
Thanks, Karen. That's an important notice there. If we go to the next question, then this is a really great score, 7.4 out of 10. So the next one we have is, and
excuse me,
yeah, no problem. And we don't have to use the Menti for that. I'm going to just ask the question here, and maybe Karina, you can capture it in the chat box as well. So we wanted to ask, and this is just would have been an open text box anyway. What benefits would usage of this tool bring to you and your organization? That would be really interesting for us to know. And how would you improve this tool even more to make it even more useful for you? Let us know what you think. These are the questions we have in the public consultation as well. I want to check the chat box a little bit if there are some questions before we close for the next group. There is a question about fair market value, if that's included. It's a really good question. It is not included. There is a chapter and appendix for reimbursement, reasonable reimbursements when you go into contracting. But to support that, actually, there is a tool that has been done and just launched by the National Health Council. It's a fair market value calculator that takes into consideration your activity, the time, efforts that you need for that, and all the other contributions, and it will give you a scale that you could consider. So there is that is coming out as well. We have Janelle saying that it would probably be useful to have an explanation of the international applicability of the templates. Did we just get an explanation from Julia just before that? I think, Julia, can you give us an insight if you know, in the drafting phase, did we have lawyers from both sides, from the US as well as from Europe, or is this more to the Europe context?
So as far as I understand, we had lawyers from a European context. I don't know that we had specific US input. I know that we did have US input from, oh, Karen, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'm an American lawyer. You had
perfect. So Karen has answered the question. Thank you, Karen. So yeah, so I think we're covered on both a European and US basis there.
Thanks. All right, I think for now, since we don't have more questions, and hopefully we answered to all of them, we can give it back to you, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that was pretty clear that the whole work done by Weekend and colleagues for years is very useful, and it is also very useful to explain what all those terms mean, because not everybody is an American lawyer. So great work. I think the polling answers are quite clear. And now I would like us to jump on another topic, which is patient engagement in the Central and Eastern Europe. So I will give the floor to Stuart and Sophia.
Yeah, thank you, Mathieu. I'm just sharing my screen. I can see Mathieu, so can you indicate that you can see my screen? Yeah, there's a nod, that's excellent. So yeah, thank you very much. Welcome everyone, good afternoon. I am Stuart Faulkner from Oxford University. I'm going to be presenting this with my colleague Sophia. So I will give the floor to Sophia to introduce herself and take you through the first part of the slides. And Sophia, just tell me when you want me to progress the slides for you.
Thank you, Stuart. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, perfect. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for joining this flash session this afternoon. So this last topic is really focusing and zooming in on patient engagement in Central and Eastern Europe. It was really good to actually listen to the first presentation about the sustainability roadmap, because this conversation is going to be so much embedded in what we have heard. And so just to start with, I'm Zsófia Bakonyi, I'm working for FPA, and I'm also for co-lead for the communications work package in Paradigm. And the workshops were stemming from the Paradigm project, because Paradigm, as all other IMI projects, had a midterm evaluation, and we've been looking at the work that has been done up until that point in the project. And I have to say that we had an expert on the panel from Central and Eastern Europe, and we got the question, you know, how much did we engage the region? And we realized that actually we were lacking a little bit the direct engagement with Central and Eastern European countries, or with patients and other stakeholders from Central and Eastern European countries. So in a way, it was a responsive thing to look at this. But if we can go to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to very quickly go through something that you're already familiar with, but Paradigm is really meant to advance the field of patient engagement, to make patient engagement easier, to make patient engagement the norm and the reality. And I have to say that when we talk about sustainability, transferability, patient engagement is not existing in a vacuum. We have various different environments in which we are operating in. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So Paradigm is essentially a European project, but we strive to have a global impact. Even within Europe, there are so many different regions with different socio-economical, political circumstances that we really had to recognize that you know, our involvement was a little bit more focused towards Western Europe. So so basically, Stuart was my accomplice and really great help in approaching, you know, the question of Central and Eastern Europe in a very academic way as well, to understand, you know, how the circumstances are different there. And obviously, if the circumstances are different, the needs might be different and the challenges might be different. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So as I said, I think that I'm sounding it from the first presentation that you have heard, but patient engagement is a collective effort. It's not happening in a vacuum. There are so many stakeholders that need to actually act together and have a common vision for patient engagement to really truly make it happen. So I think when we talk about Central and Eastern Europe, it's really important to look at, you know, what is the political environment like, how the governments are approaching this issue, how is the regulatory environment. As it was mentioned, it's really important to also look at the economical factors, the sustainability, the resources of patient organizations. These are all really important factors that will influence, you know, how patient engagement can happen and how effective it can be. So I think also looking at socio-economical circumstances, but technological as well, you know, maybe not everybody is as equipped as we are, you know, and sometimes we take it for granted that we have internet and we know how to use it and we know how to connect to online platforms. This might not be a given in Central and Eastern Europe, or you know, even in a smaller place in Western Europe. So there are many different factors. If we can go to the next slide, please. So what we have sort of planned as a response also to the midterm review question, but really to have an engagement with stakeholders from Central and Eastern Europe, which is two ways. So it's also about us trying to inform the audience in Central and Eastern Europe about what Paradigm has done, what are the kind of tools and processes and frameworks that we have worked on, but also for us to understand and really get feedback on how applicable that is in the region, and if they feel that something is missing, what is it that's missing, so that they can actually make use of the tools that Paradigm has been working on. So basically, we have come up with the idea of a Central and Eastern European patient engagement conference, which we wanted to call, and which we are calling, From Gaps to Bridges, and which was supposed to take place in May in Budapest, because the Hungarian association, industry association, was also very engaged and very supportive to bring this agenda and bring this conversation to the region. And basically, COVID has stopped our plans, and what happened is that we had to postpone the face-to-face conference, but in the interest of getting the kind of feedback that we need to improve tools and processes in Paradigm, we still had the workshop online on the 12th of May, and we can go to the next slide, where we were consulting the audience from Central and Eastern Europe, different stakeholders, on three particular topics. One of them was the sustainability roadmap, the other one was the monitoring and evaluation framework, and the third one was the capacities and capabilities. Now, we had many registrations, and we were really impressed by the interest that we have received, and we do hope, first of all, it was a very useful exercise, and you will hear more about it from Stuart in detail, but second of all, it really confirmed that there is a strong need to have this conversation in the CEE region specifically. And I would like to say that we are still hoping that at the beginning of next year, COVID and pandemic permitting, we can have a face-to-face meeting and discuss this further. So with that, I will hand back to Stuart.
Thank you, Sophia. Yes, so mentioned we had sort of three separate workshops, and we really wanted to stress test three tools. And when we talk about stress testing them, it's really just to get a sense of what we've developed, how we've developed it, and what are the specific needs and considerations that the CEE region would have to our tools, and are there extra considerations, extra ways we can adapt and amend what we've already developed to make it more relevant, more applicable, more meaningful to the CEE region. So the very first one we tested that Alyssa presented at the beginning of this workshop was the sustainability roadmap. Specifically, what we wanted to look at here is yes, the whole framework itself, but specifically we wanted to look at the intermediate goals and the actions that underline those intermediate goals. So looking at the screen here, that's really the bottom portion, and really to understand, again, were these relevant, were these meaningful, and were there any adaptations specifically that we could consider that would be relevant for the CEE region, but also the actions. Could some of those actions be more relevant and more applicable? And then the second tool we wanted to stress test was what was called a capability framework. So this is the capability of individuals and individuals within organizations to undertake patient engagement. And this framework is based on a business model canvas, broadly sort of organized under 4 pillars. That's the competencies, both at the individual level and the organizational level, the knowledge and skills, to undertake patient engagement, the processes, how things are done on how they should be done that support that, the tools and systems that are in place that enable tasks to be undertaken, and how the organization is structured in terms of its functioning and its culture towards patient engagement. And then the third one we wanted to stress test was one that's already been mentioned, which is called this monitoring and evaluation framework. And this is essentially a suite of metrics that really help the user to plan, implement, follow up, and really measure what is that return on engagement, what is the value that is being generated from that patient engagement in a much more holistic approach. You're really trying to move towards, is like me as a stakeholder for my activity, what do I want to demonstrate that has been beneficial and how do I go about it? So we wanted to test those three things. Prior to the workshop, we wanted to get a little bit more of a sense of some of the key things that the CE region faces in terms of some of the barriers, some of the enablers around sustaining patient engagement. So we designed a short survey, 12 questions or so, under the 4 pillars that you see here. So some of the political considerations, the economical, the social cultural, and the technological. And then we could take some of the answers from those pre-workshop surveys, and then we could really delve into some of those responses in more detail during our workshops that would really help us drive some of the conversations. So who turned up? We had about 80 participants in total from across all the sort of major involved stakeholders, and really from quite a nice mix from the CE region that you see here: Bulgaria, Croatia, Czech Republic, Poland, Estonia, Romania, and Hungary. And of course, that was also a fairly good representation from the rest of the Paradigm Consortium on top of that as well. So we had a very good turnout. So, political factors. One of the questions we asked our workshop participants was, does your government encourage or mandate patient engagement in medicines R&D? And so here you can see we had a fairly even mix of yes and no responses. So when we got to the workshop, we delved into that in a little bit more detail. And so what we heard back from the participants there is that you know, fairly broadly, that patient organizations and patient engagement it was often not very well recognized or valued, particularly in terms of how patient organizations interact with governments and health authorities. They often had no seat at the table. So it was very difficult to actually find a way or find a mechanism to interact effectively and meaningfully with government and health authorities, and how to sort of drive agendas and really get a voice at that table. On top of that, a number of people responded that the sort of political instability in some of the CE region countries really sort of accentuated that difficulty in getting a voice at the table on some of those key decisions, and also sort of constant changes in personnel and government priorities really meant that sort of any mandates or any frameworks that were put in place, it was difficult to sort of implement them long term. So some of the solutions that were suggested was that acknowledging that patient organizations have different priorities, and that is fine and well, but acknowledging that they would have different priorities, a mechanism to try and have a more consolidated patient voice into government rather than a sort of very sort of diffuse set of efforts. And that itself, in order for that to happen, there would need to be increases in capacities and capabilities on actually how to engage effectively with government and health authorities, how to be part of building and implementing policy and strategy. So there was some really some general sort of education and increase capacities and capabilities there. And then what you see on the right of each of these slides is just which of those 3 tools that these are relevant for. So in this instance, this had relevance to all 3 of the tools we were looking at. So then under the economical factors, one of the questions we asked was, are there any economic challenges emerging that are likely to affect the sustainability of patient engagement in your country? You can see here that was an overriding yes, there is. And so again, when we delved in, some of the themes that came out, quite a common and repeated theme was with the sort of financial and human resource constraints of how patient organizations are both structured and funded. Funding was often not diversified. They were often relying on a fairly single source of finance. Often that came from industry partners. And that was really sort of exacerbated by the fact there was often a lack of external funding mechanisms and pots of money to apply for. And many organizations were really sort of working from short-term projects, quite sort of hand to mouth, and that sort of long-term financial sustainability was missing. And so some of the solutions to that were really trying to learn a bit more and work across stakeholders to understand what are some good sort of practices and processes. And again, this sort of desire to have some increase in knowledge and capabilities about how to plan and implement strategy and how to plan and implement different financial stability models. There was quite a nice example where an industry partner actually provides some of that training to patient organizations about how to set strategies and how to instigate a sort of financial stability model. So there are some good examples there, but again, there was quite a strong desire that this needed to be much broader and much broader reaching, and not just refined to individuals. Another question under the economic theme was, we asked a question: how easy is it in your country to build a skilled workforce with the right capacities and the right capabilities to sustain patient engagement? So you can see here, at best, we had a number of responses that it was no more difficult or no more easy than average, but you can see there's a fairly heavy skew that actually many said it was difficult or very difficult to build those right capacities and capabilities. And so again, we came back to the theme many times around the limited human and financial resources that patient organizations are working under. The ability to implement consistent training was quite sporadic. And also there was highlighted that the different legal, ethical and sort of confidentiality frameworks that exist in different countries also required quite a high level of capacity and capability to deal with those. They were quite different. The ability to sort of reach and meaningfully engage with unaffiliated patients or vulnerable populations also was quite challenging with those limited human and financial resources. And then coming back to a point that was raised earlier around fair market value, it really was a call to have the use of a much more structured framework for compensation of patients in that, rather than relying on what was often the case of sort of one-to-one negotiations around compensation and remuneration. So some of the solutions to those problems that were raised up was there was a general agreement that there was a greater education about general sort of medicines R&D, but also around sort of disease-specific medical and technical information really was required to build up the capabilities of individuals and organizations so that they could better and more meaningfully engage with other stakeholders. But also that was set against quite a strong voice that said actually it should not then be to a prerequisite that patients must be a professional in order to engage meaningfully with patient engagement and other stakeholders, because actually that was felt that actually if that was a prerequisite, that would not be an enabler, that would actually start to introduce barriers again in terms of reach and participation. There was a really, I think, a strong desire to sort of break some of those existing silos that exist within organizations, but also within separate stakeholder groups, and a desire really to have that bilateral knowledge exchange and knowledge sharing of what are the good practices and processes for patient engagement. Again, we had quite a nice example where between two different organizations, they had a bilateral exchange of people, knowledge and ideas. And so staff reciprocally went into organizations, stayed there for a few weeks, learned the practices and processes that they were using, and then returned to their own organization or were able to share those practices. So again, some nice examples, but much more of that is needed. And in terms of this sort of capabilities, in terms of the framework as we have described it, the cultural differences from one country to the next are often quite different and can be quite stark. So whatever we suggest here really must be adaptable and flexible to the needs to really account for those cultural differences. So now we went on to the social cultural factors. We asked one question: are there any changes in the social cultural attitudes or taboos in your country that can affect the sustainability of patient engagement? Again, over here, we had a resounding yes, there are. So the first couple are more related to the roadmap and the capabilities framework. I think going back to what I opened in one of my slides, the same thing appearing where patient organizations and patient engagement as an entity is often quite poorly received by many stakeholders. We also asked another question whether patient engagement was considered to be as important as other activities that organizations undergo, and at best it was no more or no less, but also in some instances it was considered less important than other aspects, for example, advocacy or improving health literacy. Coming back to the idea that sort of this single source of funding, industry funding, there was a perceptual issue around that, that really was quite inhibitory sometimes, and in some countries some diseases are quite heavily stigmatized, and so that really was preventing some patients coming forward, or some certain populations of patients coming forward and being involved in patient engagement activities. And so there's a whole sort of series of sort of mindset and mind change topics here that would need to go on, that would to really sort of change that mindset to make it more inclusive and more enabling for patient engagement. And also considering aspects around how to correctly and meaningfully manage transparency and confidentiality in some of those more nuanced situations. And then under the same question, we then have some feedback that are more specific to the monitoring and evaluation framework. So there were some new impact metrics that were highlighted that could be important to build into that suite of metrics that have been developed. So what you see here is some metrics that might be able to better capture changes in awareness of patient engagement. So how visible patient engagement is in the media, for example. How better to capture different stakeholders' consideration of the value of patient engagement. Value is a very ambiguous term, and it means different things to different stakeholders. So metrics that might better capture those nuances, and also some more sort of standard numerical metrics about better capturing when patients and patient organizations are involved or authoring things like research articles. As an objective, which is really when you use a monitoring evaluation framework, that's one of the objectives you want to carry through your whole patient engagement activity. It was highlighted that as an objective, a clear, transparent and right procedures to involve patient engagement should be highlighted, that is really relevant to the CEE region. And also then we look at some of the contextual factors, again, some better ways of capturing trust, capacity and societal views on how they might change as a result of the patient engagement activity and be improved in future. And then the final theme we looked at was some of the technological factors, coming back to what Sophia said earlier on. We asked one question, do you have easily accessible technology infrastructures in your country that can help organize and support patient engagement? There's a fairly even set of responses here of yes and no's. But from the no's, it was really quite clear that there was quite a broad spectrum of responses from those countries that have actually fairly well implemented and working technology infrastructures and data capture infrastructures that permit knowledge exchange across borders and across boundaries, right the way through to some countries that have a much less mature technology infrastructure, right down to actually some populations not even having a sort of regular access to computers, which can really really have an effect on how the technology can support patient engagement. It was highlighted again that again, it's really much of those. There are some very good collaborations that are happening across border, both at the regional level and at the international level, but not everyone necessarily has access to those. And certainly they would like to know more about them and how they could better be involved in those initiatives. So what did we learn from all of this? I think it was a very rich and very interesting set of discussions we had there. And a lot came out. I really only hit upon some of the sort of key things that came out. So what are we going to do with all this information? Well, we've incorporated a lot of that feedback into the three tools that we have discussed here today, both at a general sense, but also at a specific sense that you can see on the screen here. So some of the metrics that were highlighted that were most relevant to the CE region, capturing awareness, value and trust. Those have been highlighted within the framework, and actually at September the 10th, you'll be able to understand how that whole monitoring and evaluation framework works and how it can be useful for you. From the capabilities framework, I think what clearly came out of that is that the cultural aspects that vary from country to country really do need some adaptability and flexibility in that capabilities framework to accept those and work with them rather than against them. And then from the sustainability roadmap, we had a few quite common themes of of increasing capacities and capabilities and knowledge gain on how to sort of set and implement strategy, how better to set and implement sort of financial independence and change the way that the models of sustainability are done, and also implementing change and change management within organizations. So what we've done is moved some of those key themes to sort of front load the roadmap from a CE perspective before some of the other intermediate goals can be tackled. So as Sophia said, I think that, you know, there was a lot of very good stuff outcoming this, and clearly it was our intention was it was meant to be a bilateral knowledge exchange here. I think that's clearly where we want to go forward with this. Obviously, we want to try and make what we have developed here applicable, but also it's very clear there's a lot of knowledge of actually what does work in countries where there are you know, resource constraints and additional considerations. So I think there's a lot more that we could do, and also there are I think a variety of themes that have come out of that transferability workshop that could lend themselves to be explored in more detail at future patient engagement open forum events, and we really hope we can pick some of those up next time. So at this point I will stop talking and then hand back to Sophia and Mathieu just to get some more audience participation and drive some of the Q&A session.
Thank you, Stuart. I think this was really informative, and I hope it was interesting. So I saw the comment that what you have just heard is actually the challenges are applicable even in Australia, which I found a little bit surprising. But I think that this is actually some work that can really inform other regions as well. And I don't think that we have to single out the CE region as a region where patient engagement is not that advanced. I think there are many other regions where there is a lot of work to be done, but as Stuart mentioned already, there are also really good solutions and innovative solutions to make things work better. So these are definitely worth sharing and worth sharing the ideas. So some questions now to you, and the first one is already on the screen. I was hoping to have also CEE participation in this workshop, but really happy to get feedback from all of you. Which tool would you find most useful in your current work as an immediate thing? You know, like which would be the most important for you? And I think the monitoring and evaluation framework seems to be coming up, but we need to get some more votes in to see how the group thinks. So monitoring and evaluation, I think that's a very important one, because that helps us make the case for patient engagement. Capacities and capabilities also coming up really strong. So we'll, okay. I think, okay, monitoring and evaluation is still coming out as the winner. I think that connecting to the previous survey, I think we are all, you know, on this webinar, we are all forward thinking and kind of early adapters of everything that's happening, but it's the monitoring and evaluation framework that will help us really make the case for patient engagement and get those followers into patient engagement. So that's really nice. Thank you. I think we can maybe already go to the next question. So how do we help the uptake? So this is a little bit of a brainstorming one. How do we help the uptake of the paradigm tools to improve patient engagement in the CEE region? And this is, so I think that there are two things here, essentially. There is more discussion to be had about the paradigm tools themselves and how we apply them, or it's the wider stakeholder outreach, which is in a broader sense, making the case for patient engagement in the region. So you had these three options, or to do both, and obviously we strongly feel, so far as a group that that both the stakeholder outreach and further discussion about the paradigm tools would actually help the uptake. And when we talk about further discussion, so I think there is potential to come up with specific recommendations for the tools and for the frameworks to ease the understanding and the uptake in the region. Okay, so I think the overall feedback is that we need to do everything we can. We have to have the conversation both on the tools, and we have to focus on outreach to various stakeholders in the CEE region for the paradigm tools to really have an impact. Okay. I see we are still 40 participants and just 14 votes. I mean, we have to activate ourselves here. So I don't want to, in the interest of time, I'm seeing that it's already 47 past. So I think we can go to the next question, the last question, which is a forward-looking one, so in your opinion, what are those future topics that would be useful to discuss at the next patient engagement conference that we organize in the region? And this would be really informative actually for us to think about the program of such a conference. And please let us know, you know, based on what you have heard, based on the presentation, now having understood the specific circumstances, what is your take on this, and what would be most useful to discuss with stakeholders in the region. And I think one of the interesting things is that maybe we know very little about the patient experience in patient engagement in the region, maybe even less than what we know in other regions. And I think there is what I have understood, having taken part in one of the workshops actually, is that also patients don't necessarily see a strong role for themselves, the ones that are not connected to patient organizations. There is a sense that it is the doctor, it is the HCP that knows best and should be engaged, or should be their voice. And I think this is changing slowly but surely. So designing communications tools for making the case for patient engagement, that seems to come across really strongly. And this is also in line with getting the stakeholder engagement right, and really having a wide outreach to different players, to different stakeholders in the region. So designing those communications tools and making the case for patient engagement really seems to be the key here. Okay, and we have a very interesting question. So Janelle has asked, and she's wondering to what extent cultural and societal differences are taken into account in the implementation of the tools. And well, the tools are being designed, but you know, putting them into practice is going to be, I think, a sort of the next exercise. And I think that's why when we talk about engagement with the CEE region, that's why it might make sense to have additional guidance to help implementation and to really consider those different cultural, societal circumstances, and give people ideas on how to overcome certain challenges or certain bits of the implementation that might be more challenging there than in other regions. But then again, I think that it's it's not necessarily, we don't have to talk about the CEE region in isolation. I think many of the issues, many of the questions that come out prominently in these conversations during the workshops that we had, I think many of those are applicable to other regions and other countries as well. It's just that it might be more, let's say, the challenge might be more extreme, or the sustainability problems might be more difficult, or even more difficult, shall we say. So are there any questions, any further questions about the presentation, or about how the workshops have informed us? This is definitely a conversation that we would like to pick up. And as you have seen, it's possible that the next patient engagement open forum would take place in the region. Why this makes sense? We have actually concluded that sometimes it might also be difficult for patients and patient representatives or other stakeholders to travel from the region. You know, it might be an issue of resources. So it would be potentially nice to have, and this is just plans and discussions for the moment, but it would potentially be nice to have a patient engagement open forum that is hosted in the region. Okay, so I think I would like to thank you for your attention, and thank you, Stuart, for giving us really the details on what we have found. And I will just pass it back to Mathieu.
Thank you, Zofia. Thank you, Stuart. Indeed, a great presentation on the outcomes of what came out from these very peculiar CEE transferability workshops that are organized within Paradigm. We're 7 minutes before 5. We don't need to keep you longer, guys. Thank you very much for joining. That was the third day of the Patient Engagement Open from 2020. Now we take a break. We will reconvene on September 10th with 2 great topics: the Patient Engagement Toolbox, where all the tools will be presented and we will be able to see how they all converge towards patient engagement easier for all. And on top of that, we will also emphasize how the monitoring and evaluation framework can be used. On the chat, because after this, before the summer break, we would like to get your feedback, and that's why there is a satisfactory survey. That's a word I cannot say. So it's time for me to go on vacation tomorrow morning. So please answer the survey. It's really quick for you, and it's very informative for us at PFMD, Paradigm, and UPathy to try to make the best of the presentation and the type of format and content you would like to have. So thank you very much for the 38 remaining people on the call, and have a great summer. Goodbye.